Most people never lose the wealth game because they are too stupid to win it. They lose because they are playing on the wrong floor of the building. That is the first thing I would tell you if you were sitting across from me and asking how fortunes are really made. I would not begin with motivation. I would not begin with habits. I would not begin with some sermon about waking up earlier or trying harder. I would begin with the building. There is a visible floor and there is a floor above it. The visible floor is where most decent people spend their whole lives. It is the floor of salary, saving, fairness, and approved ambition. On that floor, the rules sound noble: study hard, be reliable, work longer, spend carefully, save consistently, follow the law, respect the system. Trust that merit will be rewarded eventually. The floor above it runs on entirely different instructions. On that floor, the real questions are not about salary. They are about control: who owns the cash flow, who controls the terms of financing, who writes or captures the rules, who gets to set the price of access, who receives protection from the state, who turns law into moat and money into leverage. That is the game above the game. And the reason so many people stay poor with dignity is not that they have no talent. It is that they confuse success on the visible floor with progress toward the upper one. Those are not the same thing. A man can become outstanding on the visible floor. He can become disciplined, educated, punctual, polished, employable, and admired. He can do everything society praises and still never get near the machinery that creates dynastic wealth. He can spend 30 years becoming a better worker inside a system that was never designed to turn workers into owners in meaningful numbers. That is why I say the problem is not laziness. The problem is floor confusion. The wrong floor teaches people to earn money. The upper floor teaches people to control the channels through which money moves. Those are entirely different lives. Now, once you see the building, the first mechanism becomes painfully obvious. I call it the labor loop. The labor loop is the belief that wealth comes mainly from selling your time at a higher and higher price. The public calls this career advancement. Get the degree, get the role, get promoted, climb the ladder, negotiate the bonus, improve your RFA sum fe, become more valuable. That all sounds sensible, and some of it is useful. But it is still a loop. You are inside a structure where your economic life depends on continuing to sell your hours, your attention, your health, your availability, and your obedience in exchange for a stream of income that stops when the sale stops. That is not wealth. That is rented survival. I have never said labor is worthless. Labor can be honorable. Labor can be the starting fuel for everything that follows. But labor by itself does not scale the way ownership scales. A doctor can only see so many patients. A lawyer can only bill so many hours. An executive can only attend so many meetings. Even the highest paid professionals are still fighting the arithmetic of time. They may rent their time at a magnificent price, but they are still renting it. Ownership changes the equation because ownership keeps earning after the effort that created it is finished. That is why the labor loop is such an elegant trap. It gives people just enough income growth to keep them loyal to the loop while denying them the thing that actually compounds. The loop says your value is what someone will pay you per HR, per year, per performance cycle. The upper floor asks a very different question. What do you own that continues to produce whether or not you show up tomorrow? That is the right question. A salary can fund wealth. A salary is not wealth. A person who earns $250,000 a year and owns nothing durable can be more fragile than a person earning far less, but steadily building claims on a business, equity, land distribution, or recurring cash flow. The first man is impressive inside the labor loop. The second man is quietly climbing toward the upper floor. That difference matters more than almost anything else in finance. The second mechanism is what I call the saver trance. The saver trance is the belief that enough restraint, enough patience, enough prudence, and enough years of respectable investing will eventually close the gap between the visible floor and the upper one. Save 10%, save 20%, max the retirement accounts, buy the index, wait 40 years, be responsible, do not be greedy. Let compounding do the work. Again, Some of this is not foolish. Saving is essential. Reserves matter. Tax-advantaged accounts matter. Broad investing matters. But let us stop lying about the scale of the machine. Saving is defense. Serious wealth requires offense. A wage earner who saves steadily can absolutely become safer, stronger, and more financially stable than the majority. That is valuable. I respect it. But stability and wealth are not identical. A saver is usually operating inside a world where inflation nibbles, taxes bite, emergencies interrupt, bad years reset confidence, and the accumulation process remains linear for far too long. Even when markets compound, the gains are often too slow relative to the lives people want to build, the responsibilities they carry. And the speed at which asset owners farther up the hierarchy are moving, that is why the saver trance is so powerful. It sounds wise, it feels responsible, it gives the participant moral dignity. But very often it also keeps them on the visible floor, endlessly polishing a system that cannot produce upper floor outcomes fast enough. The elite do not despise saving. They simply know saving is not the main engine. They use savings as ammunition, reserves, dry powder, collateral, seed capital, or optionality. They do not romanticize it as the final game. The public, by contrast, is often encouraged to treat saving as if the act itself were enough. It is not enough. It is preparation, not escape. That is why I tell young people to be careful with the saver trance. If all you do is save from wages and pray, you may retire respectable. You will rarely become structurally powerful. Power comes from ownership, leverage, and control of the channels, which brings me to the third mechanism. I call it the merit veil. The merit veil is the story that keeps the whole building psychologically stable. It tells the worker that the system is fundamentally fair, that results flow mainly from talent and effort, and that if he is not moving upward fast enough, the explanation is personal. He needs more grit, more discipline, more education, more confidence, more emotional intelligence, more hustle, more mornings, more books, more positive thinking. This story is very useful. Useful to whom? To the building. If the visible floor believes the visible floor is fair, then the people on it blame themselves rather than study the architecture. The winners can say they earned everything. The strugglers can say they must not have tried hard enough. The structure hides inside morality. I have no patience for that. Talent matters, effort matters, timing matters, luck matters, network matters, family structure matters, legal treatment matters, tax treatment matters, access to capital matters, access to the right rooms matters. The system is not a pure merit machine. It is a layered machine. It rewards different behaviors differently depending on which floor you are on. That is what the merit veil hides. It hides that the upper floor is not mainly won by being a more obedient, educated, and industrious version of the worker beneath it. It is won by changing games, by shifting from labor to ownership, from linear accumulation to leveraged accumulation, and from rule following to strategic fluency around the rules that actually shape outcomes. Once you accept that, the next three mechanisms become far more useful, because these are the games that actually move you upward. The fourth mechanism is ownership over labor. This is the first real wealth game. If you remember nothing else from me, remember this. The rich do not primarily get rich because they work harder than everybody else. They get rich because they own things that other people work inside, buy from, subscribe to, rent, license, or rely on a business equity, real estate, intellectual property, distribution, brand contracts, land, something that keeps collecting after the original labor is done. Ownership is what converts time into an asset rather than a paycheck. That is why the rich can sleep and still get richer, not because they are magical, because the thing they own keeps producing, whether or not they are personally present for each transaction. This is where the average person often makes a fatal mistake. He tells himself he will think about ownership later. Later when the job is more stable, later when the kids are older, later when the debt is gone, later when he understands investing better, later when he finally has enough money to begin. Later is where the visible floor keeps people forever. Ownership has to begin embarrassingly early and embarrassingly small for most people. A small equity account, a side business, a digital product, a tiny acquisition, a rental with actual numbers, revenue share, royalties, stakes in something productive. The form can differ, the rule is the same. Do not spend the first half of life perfecting labor, and only then begin asking how ownership works. By then, the best compounding years are gone. The shift does not happen in one heroic leap. It happens in a transition. Keep the job, use the paycheck. Lower bad debt, build oxygen, then use the oxygen to buy claims. Claims on future cash flow appreciation or both. That is the game. The fifth mechanism is leverage over saving. This is the second real wealth game, and it is the one that frightens most ordinary people because it was hidden behind moral language for too long. People are told debt is bad. That statement is partly right and mostly useless. Debt used for consumption is usually corrosive. Debt used for productive acquisition can be transformative. The wealthy know the difference. The poor are rarely taught to. If I borrow to buy a machine that produces more than the cost of the debt is not a burden in the same way as a credit card used for clothes and restaurant bills. If I borrow carefully to acquire a cash-flowing asset at the right price, the debt is a tool. If I use debt to control an appreciating claim while someone else helps pay it down, that is not the same game as borrowing for a vacation or a car whose value declines before the smell leaves the seats. This is why I say the upper floor speaks a different language. The public speaks in payments. The upper floor speaks in cost of capital, cash, on-cash returns, yield, spread, depreciation, equity build-up, tax treatment, and optionality. One person asks, can I afford the monthly? The other asks, what kind of asset is this? What does the debt cost? Who services it? And what happens to my equity if the asset performs? Those are not the same minds. Saving grows linearly. Leverage, when intelligently paired with the right asset, can grow geometrically. Of course, leverage can also destroy people. That is why the real game is not reckless borrowing. It is controlled amplification. Know the downside. Know the carrying cost. Know the failure scenario. Have reserves. Use conservative assumptions. Do not treat optimistic math as underwriting. The upper floor is not wealthy because it ignores risk. It is wealthy because it understands how to use risk without letting risk own the operator. That is why leverage belongs beside ownership and not beside gambling. The sixth mechanism is what I call the rule map. This is the third real wealth game. Most people think the system is a set of neutral rules that everyone must simply obey. The upper floor sees something else. It sees incentives, privileges, tax treatments, regulatory barriers, legal classifications, state-backed protections, licensure, intellectual property, finance channels, and policy decisions that are never as neutral as they are advertised. The public sees fairness, the upper floor sees a map. This matters because fortunes are not mainly built by playing fair in the childish sense. They are built by understanding which rules actually govern outcomes, which rules are marketing, which rules are customs, which rules can be navigated, and which rules quietly reward capital over labor. I am not telling you to become criminal. Criminality is stupid. I am telling you to become literate. Study the tax code, study entity structures, study how debt is treated, study how depreciation works. Study what is deductible and what is not. Study which industries live behind regulatory moats. Study why some monopolies are called platforms. Some are called utilities, some are called networks, and some are called indispensable national champions. Study how licensing keeps competitors out. Study how scale rewrites what is called acceptable. Study how the state protects some cash flows more than others. Once you do that, you stop walking around like a tourist in your own economy. You begin reading the building plan that is the rule map, and it is why the truly wealthy often appear to break the rules without actually stepping outside the structure. They are not winging it. They are using the map better than the people who were taught only to obey the signs. Now, some people hear a framework like this and fall into despair. They say, fine, if the upper floor is so different, and if the elite have advantages ordinary people do not, then what is the point? The game is closed. That is the wrong conclusion. The game at the very top may be partially closed. State-backed monopoly, money creation, dynastic influence, regulatory capture at scale. Those are not available to ordinary people starting from nothing. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. But that does not mean the visible floor is your destiny. There is a wide and meaningful territory between being a pure wage earner forever and becoming a global dynasty. Most people do not need to become the Medici to transform their family line. They need to stop playing games that guarantee they remain economically fragile. That is a much more realistic goal, and it begins with the transition. Use labor to buy ownership. Use saving to fund leverage. Use literacy to read the rule map. That is how the shift begins. Not with fantasy, with transition. That is the part motivational culture never wants to admit, because transition is exhausting. You work the visible floor job while building upper. Floor assets. You live below your image while buying claims. You study boring structures when everyone else wants excitement. You say no to status consumption so you can say yes to productive acquisition. You spend nights learning financing instead of arguing online about whether the system is fair. You tolerate slower visible gratification in exchange for a completely different compounding arc. That is what building from nothing usually looks like, not glamorous, strategic. Now let me give you the identity flip, because this is the most important reward point in the whole argument. At the beginning, most people think the question is, how do I earn more? That is a visible floor question. The richer question is, how do I own more? A worker asks how to become more valuable to an employer. An owner asks how to convert value into claims. A saver asks how much he can put away this month. A levered allocator asks how to turn reserves into control of something that grows or pays. A rule follower asks whether the system is fair. A strategist asks what the system rewards, whether he approves of it or not. That identity change is the hinge. You stop being a participant who hopes the system will eventually validate you. You become a student of how wealth is actually assembled. That is how poor people who start with nothing but discipline and awareness begin to separate themselves from the cage. Not because the system becomes just, because they stop demanding justice from a structure that was never built for that purpose, and start extracting advantage where advantage can honestly be built. That is a much colder way to think. It is also much more useful. Let me say something directly about the elite, because source material like this often becomes melodrama. The elite are not all geniuses. Many are lazy. Some are stupid. Some inherited the whole thing. Some are merely fluent in structures they did not build. But they do understand one thing the public often refuses to understand. Wealth comes from control over cash flow, leverage, and rules. It does not primarily come from virtue. That is why an ordinary hardworking person can stay stuck while a mediocre, but strategically positioned person rises. The strategically positioned person is on the upper floor. Even if he is less admirable in many personal ways, that is painful to admit, it is still true often enough to build your life around. And once you admit it, you stop using admiration as your guide. You start using structure. Do not ask whether a person deserves his wealth. Ask which game he is playing. Do not ask whether you are a good worker. Ask whether you are building claims. Do not ask whether saving is responsible. Ask whether it is sufficient for the life you actually want. Do not ask whether rules are fair. Ask which rules shape ownership. Those are upper floor questions. And upper floor questions produce different outcomes. Now I want to end the only honest way I know. There really are only a few games that matter if your goal is to build wealth from very little. The first is ownership. If you do not own, you remain trapped in labor. The second is leverage. If you do not understand it, you grow too slowly while others scale. The third is strategic literacy. If you do not understand the map, you confuse obedience with progress and wonder why the scoreboard never changes. Everything else is either fuel for those games or distraction from them. That is why I say the poor are not mainly losing because they lack effort. They are losing because they are disciplined inside games that cannot take them where they think they are going. The labor game, the saving game, the fairness game, each one sounds noble. None is enough. The real games are different. Ownership, leverage, strategy, that is the upper floor. And once you see it, the final choice becomes very simple. You can keep becoming better at games that were designed to make you useful, or you can begin learning the games that make you increasingly difficult to own. That is where wealth begins. Not when you work harder at the same script, when you change the game you are actually playing.